everyone, how's it going? I hope you're doing well and just getting ramped up into busy wedding season because the weather is finally getting nice out. I just returned from Peru. I was there for a full week last week for the AfterShoot retreat. So the company with AI editing and AI calling, AfterShoot, sponsored just 100 photographers coming out to the middle of Peru, maybe 50, 60 miles from Machu Picchu, to basically spend 3 or 4 days together making photos, talking about photos, listening to a few lectures, and then just going out and shooting together. I took a ton of images, and I could go through any one of these that you're looking at on your screen right now, but I really want to start with this one. There's a photographer there named Jason, who, really great guy. He's a really fantastic, interesting person, really jovial and just kind, and was bringing around a lot of camera equipment because he just really loves using off-camera flash, which is totally great. Nothing wrong with off-camera flash, but we were talking about photography and I shared some of my images and this one stood out to him. He had a very interesting remark about it. He mentioned that he kind of jumped ahead of where he might need to be technically to just like right into the deep end with off-camera flash work. And I remember that feeling as well as a photographer, getting started buying a bunch, at least 3 speed lights, a bunch of modifiers so that I had my little studio, my kit that I could bring anywhere and create a scene wherever I needed it. It's really tempting to think that that's necessary in photography, and sometimes it is, especially based on the kind of style that you like. But you don't have to use off-camera flash to balance against the sun, at least not anymore, and you really haven't needed to for probably close to 10 years now, because the dynamic range that most sensors, digital sensors, can capture is enough that in the right environment, with the right balance of how much you push your sensor, you can create a fully dynamic image like the one you see here, where you can see the couple against the direct sunlight without any need for off-camera flash. So I'm gonna jump in and just reset this picture so you can see how it was captured with no edits whatsoever. And the camera settings for this are 1/200th of a second, f11, ISO 50. So there's a lot going on here. Number one, it's the lens choice. 24mm, the Canon EF 24 1.4 is one of my favorite lenses, and it's not just because it's a 1.4 prime lens, it's because when you stop down to about f11 or any smaller aperture, you get this really specific, distinct characteristic in any harsh light. So in this case, it's just the sun. You get these blades here. I think there's 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish. 9 blades because there's 9 aperture blades in the barrel of the lens. And I love that look. Most wide angle lenses, when you close the aperture down, you get something like 12 blades or something like that. It's a lot more, and it looks cool, but not as cool as 9 blades in my opinion. So that's consideration number one, is just the choice in lens and the characteristic that I'm looking for in that lens that only that lens is gonna give me is this really cool looking sun star. Number two, the fact that it is wide angle really helps with dynamic range. If I shot this exact same angle with an 85 or maybe even a 50mm, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to make the full dynamic range kind of gel in a way that looks natural. Which, by the way, this does take a little bit more of the extreme end of editing. And when you sit there and compare the straight out of camera to the final edit, it almost never is going to look totally natural to your eye. You really have to edit with the mindset of, okay, if all I see is the final result, how is it going to impact me? And that's where, no matter how fast editing becomes with tools like AI editing and AI calling and all this, having time between when you actually finish the edit and when you deliver it, where you can see things with a fresh eye, can really give you that first experience type of perspective. You'll never have the same experience as somebody else that's never seen the photo and wasn't there when it was being made, but it's just something to consider. Like, put some time in between things, because the edit is always going to look like you went too far and you did too much, even though that's not necessarily the case. So another thing to mention, the quality of light. So yes, they're really underexposed here, but in real life, in the moment, I could see how the light was being shaped and falling on them. You can't just underexpose somebody in shadows so that they're like totally dark and expect that when you recover all that shadow data, that they're gonna look good no matter what. That's simply not the case. The quality of light on the original subject still needs to be good, even if it's massively underexposed. And behind me here is basically, thousands-year-old Incan ruins, like these steps that just go up, that have a bit of a orangish hue to them, but it's not so much that it's tinting their skin tone in a way that I find really problematic. So at the end of the day, it's still a very soft sort of wrapping light around the couple. Again, yeah, they're silhouettes in the original shot, but the final quality of light on the subject definitely still matters when your intention is to have a nice, balanced, dynamic range. What else to say about this? Compositionally, still so critical. Pay attention to these horizon lines, right? Any point of contrast, like this bright sky against the dark mountains here, this line, this ridge of mountains is going right alongside the couple in a way that almost kind of lines up with how her hands and his suit kind of align here. That's a very pleasing composition. I probably could have gone even a little bit lower of an angle, but being that as a 24mm lens, I didn't want to get too much lower because it starts to become exponentially more unflattering the more up and beneath somebody that you're photographing. So I'm just gonna edit this now. My preset is all about pulling back highlights, boosting shadows. I still have spots available for people if you wanna have my AI editing profile. You just have to be a workshop tier patron and then just comment on that thread and I'll give you access to it. It's the exact same settings I'm using here, but here's how it works. No matter what, I apply the exact same preset to any image and then I boost exposure until the skin tone is where I want it to be. I try and eject from my mind what the colors and everything else is doing until the skin tone is the brightness that I want. This is too bright now, but I don't care yet. I just want to dial in skin tone. So boost exposure until that's there. Only after the skin tone is the right brightness that I'm happy with will I start to adjust white balance to try and dial in, again, hyper fixating on just the skin tone. I don't care that it's turning this a little too purple or this a little too blue. Hyper fixated on just looking at skin tone. You can even zoom in. Oftentimes I'll hit the L key to be in lights out mode at this point so that I have an even more kind of siloed view of what the colors look like. And just kind of tinkering just white balance adjustments a little bit until I get it roughly where I want. That looks pretty good. Now I'm gonna hit the M key for the gradient tool. Oop, I already still have some applied from my first edit. Let me reset all gradients. Doop, there we go. And I'm just gonna start to drag in these gradients. One from the top, one from the bottom, one from the side. If the top's not dark enough, I'll drag in another one. All of these are at like minus 0.3. And I'll drag it in at a slightly different angle from a slightly different, with a slightly different degree of intensity here. And just kind of work that. And then at about this stage, I'll start to pull back the highlight slider. Doop, doop, doop. There we go. Just to see how much more I can recover right in the highlights. That looks pretty good, actually. And now I'm gonna retinker my white balance to be a little more dialed in. And now is where I might play around with my color grading. My preset always has a specific little combination of colors, but I'll tweak the mid-tone saturation and the shadow color to be kind of anything that feels right for the specific image. Now, you could also get in here and drag in a gradient and say, intersect with subject, and it'll AI detect the subject and punch them out relative to the sky if you want to get really specific. But you can see past a certain point, you can already start to see it here. If I add too many of those where the subject is separated from the background, we'll duplicate this mask like this. It starts to feel a little artificial and a little bit like they were photoshopped onto a background. So if I use a subject mask to kind of punch them out, I'm very, very light-handed with it, and it's one of the last steps that I do. I try and work the image as close to where I want it as I can before I get to that stage. And at this stage, yeah, it's looking pretty good to me. Let's go back to the original edit before I reset everything. Boop. So my original edit was a little bit cooler, which is fine. I kind of like the warmer one though. And my original one was a little less dramatic with the gradients. And that's the other thing you have to keep in mind. When you start doing gradients or brush tool, which I rarely use the brush, but when you start doing these kinds of dodging and burning techniques, it's really easy to go a little heavy-handed, especially if you're showing somebody what you're doing. But yeah, you can kind of see, of course, the jump in brightness, but also let me just turn off only the gradient masks, and it should give you a sense of how I'm kind of creating a blob shape to the vignette So it's kind of like showering everything to the bottom right in the emphasis toward the couple, instead of being like in the center or, you know, general middle, the way that the actual vignette tool works. I hate that tool. I virtually never use the vignette tool. So if you have any questions at all, let me know. I will show you my tone curve because that's probably interesting. That does keep the highlights and crushes the, or fades the blacks in a little bit. So the blacks are never completely, totally black. That's just a stylistic preference that I like. You could just keep all the blacks as well if you wanted. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. I hope you found that helpful and interesting, and I'll be back soon. I have so much footage and so many photos to go through, and I'm really excited to share them. But if you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thank you so much for your attention. Bye, everyone.